Yes,
I
and
think so.
broadcast.
Yeah, broadcast, okay.
Not broadcast, just recorded.
Just recorded, okay.
I guess I should say for those.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. You are here because you are members of a multi-member board or committee, as the town officially lists it. And there are certain rules to the game that we have to all play by when we are either elected officials or appointed members of boards and committees. So, once a year, we have an annual meeting where the members have a little review of procedures. We have Jen from the town's clerk office with us tonight, as well as our town attorney, Mike Ford, to go over some of the formal rules, regulations, laws that govern how we operate as a town with our boards and committees and elected officials. Kevin Galligan, who is the vice chair of the select board, is with us tonight. And Mark Reel, who's one of our new members here as an assistant town manager. He's been around for almost a year,
Approaching that, yeah.
coaching that. So I just want to start things off by saying, you know, we certainly appreciate every single day when Kevin and I are working with the town manager, the town manager's staff, the assistant town manager, the clerk's office, the contribution that you people as volunteers on these boards and committees is invaluable to the town. And we just want to thank you so much for your willingness to serve and the participation that you bring, and the knowledge that you bring, the experience that you bring, the ability to communicate with wide reaches of our citizens in the town is something that is so necessary for the town to continue to operate appropriately. So we want to let you know that we have looked at, as a goal for the select board this year, and in conjunction with our town manager and the staff in the town hall, we want to make sure that your time is not wasted, that your time is used wisely, efficiently, and that we want to make it a better and easier system for you, and one that brings more benefits to the town as well. So we're looking at ways that we can assist you in the job that you're doing. We're looking at town staff that can work with you, whether it's someone from the town manager's office, whether it's, you know, through Mike Ford, whether it's through the clerk's office. We're looking for ways to help coordinate the efforts that our multi-member boards and committees are involved in, so that there's not a duplication of services or efforts. We want to make sure that there's a coordination so that we don't have groups kind of going in different pathways, trying to attack the same problem. So we're looking over the course of this year to institute a few simple changes, but also to be as helpful as we can for the jobs that you people do on the boards and committees. I'm going to turn it over now, so that she can go through the things that are important for the town clerk's office to make sure happen here.
Good evening. I am the Assistant Town Clerk, Jen Higgins. Kelly is enjoying a much-deserved vacation. So nice. Many of you know me or have been to our office and done these things, but I'm just going to run through. The first thing is the oath of office. Once you're appointed or reappointed by the town manager's department, you come to our counter and you get the oath of office, or swearing in as we call it. We'll then give you a copy and sign it and seal it. We give you a committee packet, which includes the open meeting law and the ethics. The packet also includes the how-to for posting agendas and minutes. One of the very important things we do is scheduling a meeting. So in order to book a meeting whether it is a public meeting or a private work group without a quorum, you'll need to book the meeting room through the town clerk's office. We have over 50 boards and committees and 2 rooms that offer the Zoom and live broadcasting. So it's tight. We do a 15-minute buffer, so you may be asked to move your meetings to accommodate MIS. We do, all of our Zoom links are assigned through the MIS department as well as any AV needs. Agenda requirements. Most of you post your agendas with us, but for those who don't, an agenda needs to include the day, date, time, and location. The Zoom link is specific to the board or committee, and Peggy or Mia will give that to you. The agenda must be submitted to the town clerk's office and always CC myself, Kelly, and Bethany. Problem is that someone's on vacation, somebody's out sick, we won't get it in that 48 hours, and then you don't get your meeting. So make sure you get all of us on there. We prefer 72 hours in advance, but it must be 48 hours in advance. The town clerk's office will always say we've received and posted the agenda. If for some reason you haven't gotten that, give us a call. A revised agenda can be posted and submitted to the town clerk's office. The agenda must specify using an asterisk to say what is revised, and the material being added to an agenda within 48 hours should be material that the chair was unaware of prior to the posting. Lastly, we do meeting minutes. Your meeting minute should also include the day, date, and time, where the location, or the meeting room in which the meeting was held. The minute should be created and approved in a timely manner with the town clerk's office, which is 3 meetings or 30 days. And many of you have heard from Bethany, who is following up on every single meeting about where your meeting minutes are. And then she comes back again and says, where's those minutes? It needs to include a summary of each discussion and each topic. Any documents that were reviewed at a public meeting should be listed in the minutes and either posted in an online packet and available upon request from the public. Minutes should also be submitted in an email or at the counter, and you will get a response saying received and posted from Kelly, Bethany, or myself. We have lots of information on the paperwork, which includes our email addresses, and you are always welcome to stop by, and we are more than happy to help anybody. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna bounce a little bit on our agenda. We were looking at questions and answers at the end of the meeting, but if there are specific questions that people might have in terms of the clerk's
Would
office.
it be possible to have a single address to send minutes and agendas to instead of 3 people? When the people change, we have to know that they've changed and find the new address. Could it be just like agendas@orleans.com or minutes at, instead of us picking all 3 people?
We can talk to the MIS department and Peter and see if that's an option, so that it would automatically come to all of us. The problem is we just don't want one general that goes to one person, which is how it usually is. Many of you remember Aaron. If you submitted things to Aaron, it got bounced to me, but I don't think it can go to 3 of us. So that might be the only thing. Am I wrong?
We could probably have
Okay.
one that
There we go.
will then forward to whoever needs to be
Okay,
forwarded, so so we can look at that for sure.
Just as an aside to that, one of the things that we have talked about, and one of the goals for the select board, deals with communications, both internal within the town hall, with our citizens, with our groups and committees and whatnot. And we're looking at ways that we can have that better communication, so that there aren't gaps in what people know or how they find things out. So it's a big goal that we have. We have lots of little parts of that we're looking at, as I said, both internal, external. How can we make it better so that people know and understand what's going on in town? So those kinds of things are things that we will certainly address to make it easier for agendas and minutes to be out there for the public, for them to get to the town hall when they're ready to go. So, thank you. Other questions?
Do all meetings need to be in a room that you can record, or can you have a meeting in another room and write up minutes and submit them, and is that considered legal for the way meetings are supposed to be run?
It's legal, but not preferable. The policy of the town is that every meeting get recorded, if it can be, through our technology. So thus, trying to get you in a room where that's able to happen, and meetings can be viewed at home as well, if that happens. So that's the goal.
So again, it's legally is one thing, but policy of the town is we want to have as much openness and transparency as possible. Having the meeting recorded, whether it's broadcast, usually they're broadcast live, but just to have it recorded so that people can go back and look at it and you know exactly what was said and who said it and when they said it and what the context was, so that one of the discussions that we've had in the past has been just how precise the minutes have to be. And I think the understanding is they don't have to be all that precise. They don't have to be verbatim. There are certain things that need to be included, but they don't have to be super meticulous 20 pages for a 1-hour discussion. So having minutes that are reflective of the discussion and the participants in the discussion is great, but we also want to have that backup that's on the video so that there's never a question about what happened. So that's kind of a policy, as Mike said, that the town is really looking to adhere to. Okay, other questions on that? No? Okay, thank you. There might be some later, but. All right, a couple of things now in terms of, from the select board. I think you all know and understand, I hope the way our town government works. We have elected officials. Our Board of Health, for instance, is a regulatory body, is an elected board. The select board is elected. And it's the duty of the elected boards, the select board in this case, to establish policy for the town. And in our deliberations, in the discussions, in the back and forth, as we look at policies for the town, the direction that we believe the town should be going in, we then have town hall staff, a town manager, assistant town manager, and many of the people that work under the town manager and the town hall staff, whose job is to carry out that policy and to run the day-to-day operations of the town in an efficient way. We have our advisory boards and committees that are just that. They are advisory boards to the select board. Those boards and committees are not tasked with the job of establishing policy. They are reviewing aspects that fall under their expertise, depending on what the committee of the board is, and communicating their recommendations to the select board. And so in order to make that happen effectively and efficiently, we have liaisons from the select board that can work with the chairs of those different boards and committees to make sure that there's an understanding of what's going on within that particular area that the committee deals with. And what we are looking to establish this coming year now is to further aid and assist the boards and committees by having staff members from the town hall also work with those boards and committees, and to ensure that the boards and committees have the backups that they need to deliberate in their area, and that if there's legal representation that's needed, we want to make sure that we can develop an appropriate way in which all those boards and committees are given the legal backups that they need when they deal with difficult problems, questions, or situations that arise depending on what their charge is as a board or a committee. So we're in the process now of looking at what staff members, and as you probably know, we have several new staff members. We were able to create some positions. I'll tell you, the The happiest man in town hall, I think, is probably George Meserve, who had an incredible workload that spanned so many different areas, you know, from sewer systems to what color a sign was on Main Street. And so we now have staff working with George. We have staff in the town administrator's office working to help cover some of those things that George had to do on his own. So, you know, having a person in the town hall that's helping to coordinate the efforts of, and I'll just use this as an example. You can imagine we have a planning board, we have a zoning board of appeals, we have an architectural review committee. Tangential to those groups is an economic development committee. So
Site plan review.
site plan review. You know, so having someone like Elizabeth Jenkins, for instance, who's the new assistant town planner, be a staff person that works with those committees, ensures that they get whatever information and materials they need from town hall, so they can work effectively and efficiently, and that their efforts are being coordinated with the efforts of those other groups that she liaisons with. You know, we think that we can build a system, as I said, that makes your jobs a lot easier and a lot more effective for the town. So we're in the process of putting those things together now. Kevin, do you want to speak to, you know, the chairs meetings that we're having, and then our commitment to develop the town's webpage and
Sure.
the committees involved with that?
Sure, I've attended actually my first one, and this started with Andrea Shaw Reed a couple of years ago that continued under Michael and Mark, and now my role. And we had our first chairs meeting a couple of weeks ago, and it was great. Our chair or your designee, more than welcome to attend, and it's informal. It allows us to share what we're thinking about, but it also allows you to share with us, you know, kind of similar to what Joan said about just a simple email address. One of the things that we heard about was, you know, as we recognize, and we say it all the time, is how do we recruit new members? And that came up in the chairs meeting, and I think one of the attendees said, well, gee, over in a neighboring town, when there are these fairs that are held or community events, they have a table that helps promote, you know, departments, government, boards. So we're actually going to do that when we have the Village Green event on Friday over the weekend in preparation for the Outermost Festival. So again, it allows people that may be new, or we find a way to, you know, contact them in a different way to say, hey, would you want to join CONSCOM? Would you want to join the Board of Health? Or are you interested? And it kind of takes the fear out of all this formality and just talk to people and get a sense of them. So that came out. I look forward to this because I think it really is demonstrating, you know, how we're listening, like I said, in a more informal way, so we can work on problems that you really want to work on outside of the formality of an official meeting, because I think we get a lot more done when we're just out for coffee, sit and chat, you know, in the supermarket or wherever we meet. So I think, you know, the chairs meeting do happen. What day of the week is it? It's the
Second Wednesday of the
second
month,
Wednesday of each month.
8:30 to 9:30.
8:30 to 9:30, and it just gets us all together in a room, and we chat and work on some things. I think the other thing that we've had, and again, with great support from staff, every committee has its own webpage. It actually is a vehicle. I'm looking at Elaine from Finance Committee. They're probably the committee that has taken the most advantage of making sure that your own committee webpage serves as an information tool for the public, but also for you. And I'm sure, you know, I do it at the select board. Before coming to the meeting, I go right to our page, I look at our policies and, you know, printed out our recent goals and our select board liaison policy. It can be a real good resource, and that way that committee pages that you're posting are exactly a resource that all the community is seeing, and you can refer people. So it makes it more efficient to see that we can support that. Like I said, we've got really great staff, so don't limit the opportunities that you can see. If you see Brewster is doing a little this or Eastham's doing that, ask if we can do it. Because I'll tell you, folks in MIS and town clerk's office, we're a can-do bunch around here. So come up with ideas, and we look forward to supporting it, but utilize the webpage for not only the public's resource, but your own.
Thank you, Kevin. So, I just want to emphasize one thing, though, that as we endeavor to create opportunities for the public to see what's going on inside the walls of Town Hall and what the town government is really doing, we want to make sure that they get an accurate message, that they understand that what might be a topic of discussion is not necessarily a policy coming out of Town Hall. It might be something that opens up other avenues and involves other people. And so one of the things we want to be careful of is that the boards and committees always run things through either the select board liaison person or the staff liaison person before they have a discussion with a newspaper reporter, or before they make an assumption about this is what the town's going to do, when in fact there might be reasons why the town can't do that. So, that's why we want to make sure that we have this internal communication really up and running with the right people, fitted in with the right committees, so that we're all on the same page. Doesn't mean we all have to think the same way, that we all have the same ideas. Just means that we need to make sure that the public understands that there's a difference between what might be an informal discussion and what is actually going to come out as a policy, or perhaps a warrant article for town meeting. So we're hoping that by having dedicated staff members for each of our committees to go along with the select board liaison persons, we can really get that communication flowing to the benefit of all.
Mark, I'd just add, particularly for new members, if you're not aware, usually by the August, or certainly by this time, Select Board sets what we call liaisons to each and every board and committee. So if you haven't gone on the Select Board site, you can see liaison assignments. It's a big chart. Run down your committee, you can see who is your liaison. Typically, the communication is between the chair, vice chair, or whoever they designate if they're away on vacation or traveling. But again, our goal is to make sure that we're listening to your needs. We can't always attend every meeting. I'll say many of us do try our damnedest or try our best to get to every meeting. It's impossible when you've got typically a Wednesday or Thursday, can be anywhere from 5 to 6 meetings going on, as Jen pointed out. But use your chair communication or designee to the select board to bounce anything off, in terms of, should this be posted on the agenda, or, because no doubt between the bunch of us, we've been there. We've been in your shoes many, many times before we were even on the select board, so we can give you some good advice. And again, don't expect all select board liaisons to attend every meeting. They are your resource, but they just may not always be able to be there.
Questions on any of those things? Okay, Mark is going to go over a few things on the committee handbook, just a brief overview on that.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Mark Reel. I'm the Assistant Town Manager. I'm not going to go through the entire book, but because a lot of it is actually what Mike and Jen have been talking about or will talk about. But there are a couple points that I want to just mention. If you have it in front of you, on page 7, under Public Information Meetings, mentions that committee may issue press releases periodically to keep the public informed, and that all press releases should be submitted to the town manager's office for review prior to distribution. It goes along with what Mark has said about media and press issues, we would ask that you come through the town manager's office so we understand the messaging and we're all on the same page. We don't want to see information in the media that may not be quite accurate, so we want to work together to make sure that our message is correct. And we've hired Amanda Converse, who is our Economic Development Coordinator / Public Information Officer, and she's sitting right there in the back in the middle. So you'll be working with her on those issues. Town council appointments, we ask that, this is just a reminder that if you're interested in meeting with town council, those requests should be submitted to the town manager's office. Those will funnel through Mike Solitro, but you can reach out to any of us and we can direct those requests to Mike if you don't have his contact, which is msolitro@town.orleans.ma.us. Let's see, a couple other points. Just a reminder on the annual town report. The report is prepared by the chair and voted on by the entire committee. We ask that you try to submit that to the town manager's office by the first week in January. And then under warrant articles, this is on page 9 as well. There's conversation around warrant article requests. There's a new select board policy regarding those requests. And so obviously the time has passed for the fall town meeting, but the May town meeting will make sure that the committees all receive that policy as well. It has gone out already, but if you're new, you wouldn't have seen that yet, so.
You have a form for that now,
Yes,
correct?
we have a form and a kind of an outline draft guidelines for article submissions. That's all I have.
Any questions for Mark on the handbook or things that are in there? We can come back to that at the end of the meeting if there are. All right, Mike, I guess it's your turn now.
Sure. Well, thank you, Mark. Good to see you all this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Mike Ford. I'm town council to the town. And there's a list of A through A that I'm supposed to cover, if you've checked that out.
It's circular, Mike.
It is circular, and sometimes these are related issues, Mark, so it is circular. That said, the first issue, open meeting law, was covered nicely by Jen, but there's a couple of things I just kind of want to maybe expand on or emphasize with respect to the open meeting law. First, remember, if you're a chair of a committee, you have a particular unique responsibility with respect to the open meeting law, and that is the agenda. When the law was amended a couple of years ago and the Division of Open Government and the Attorney General's Office issued their new regulations, it became very clear that chairs are responsible for their agendas and what appears on the agenda. And there is a requirement that anything that the chair reasonably anticipates will be discussed has got to be an individual agenda item. And if it's not on the agenda, then it can't be discussed or acted on unless it's something that came up after posting, and it is of a nature that it can't wait until the next meeting. So it's got to have kind of an emergency flavor to it or a timeliness flavor that would create an exception. And if you get into one of those spots, feel free to reach out to the town manager's office. If necessary, they would contact me, and we'll give you whatever assistance we can on that before the meeting, so that we don't find ourselves in a situation where a committee may get into something that they should not have gotten into under the open meeting law. And conversely, if something came up that really fit an exception, that we've passed over something that was very important and had a time deadline, and because of the strict rule that you can't act on something that's in the agenda, we missed it. So either way, reaching out would be helpful, and as Mark says, we're here to help and try and help you with that job. Second thing I wanted to just mention how important it is that when you do get appointed, you actually go down and take that oath of office. This is particularly important with respect to regulatory bodies. Sometimes on a reappointment, a member might have the tendency not to run right down. They're already on the board, they were reappointed, the meetings just keep flowing, they keep going, and they haven't gone down and gotten actually reappointed. And the town had a case a number of years ago, which turned out that it was decided on other grounds, but one of the issues that was raised, it was a regulatory board, was that two of the people who voted had not gone down and taken the oath of office, and therefore the allegation was on appeal that their votes didn't count. And so it's important. I don't often see it. Usually a new member, you know what you're supposed to do. You get down, you get sworn in. But sometimes in those reappointment slots, it can slide a little bit. It's real important to get down there and get sworn in again, go through the entire thing, particularly on a regulatory board. The other thing that because I've seen it in a few situations here this year, and I've had questions about it, is minutes. Minutes have to get done. There is a provision that says 30 days. Probably at the end of the day, that's, discretionary, not necessarily mandatory, but I won't tell you that as a legal opinion. But in any event, real important they get down there. The other question that comes up frequently is, okay, we've got draft minutes, we've got a request, whether it's a FOIA request or something narrower than that, for a copy of the draft minutes. Are they a public record? Yes, they are. Even if they haven't been approved yet by the full board. Attorney General's given an opinion on it, it's black letter. So if draft minutes exist, they are a public record. And sometimes draft minutes, having not been approved and gotten the input from all the members who were there, can contain things that may not be accurate. And so in keeping with Mark is saying that the selectmen want to get information out, but they want to make sure that the information is not confusing to the public, but is accurate. If you can keep your minutes going timely, so draft minutes are only on your books a week or two, that's much better to get them approved. The other question I get frequently, Jen touched on it, but I want to remind you of it, particularly again on regulatory boards, that if you're acting on something, you got a full application, you've got all the copies to the application, let's say it's a notice of intent, and it had a number of exhibits for the Conservation Commission, and somebody gets up to make a presentation, either the applicant or somebody who has something to say about it, pro or con, and they refer to documents, or they refer to an exhibit, and they may not be in the notice of intent application, make sure you ask for a copy. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, it is the committee's, and again, I'm not going to pick on them, but the chair's responsibility to make sure that that document, that exhibit, whatever it is, gets into the file of the town so that it can be added to the minutes. And again, when you do your minutes, send them down to Jen. Those have to be referenced, those exhibits or documents, but they don't have to be provided necessarily, but there has to be a spot where the public can find them on a link or in the files at the town hall where the committee itself keeps its minutes. Touch briefly on quorum, but I think most of you are familiar with this. I mean, the general rule is that on any committee, a majority of the appointed members is a quorum, and but there are certain regulatory boards where a quorum is an extraordinary majority. For example, Board of Appeals, 4 out of 5 is required for variances, special permits, acting on an appeal of a decision of the building commissioner. And And so oftentimes, those regulatory boards are faced with, unfortunately, 4 members at a meeting. And so, let's say I represent an applicant, I show up that night before the Orleans Board of Appeals, and there's only 4 members. Generally, the Board of Appeals has not a written policy, but kind of a customary policy, that they will offer the applicant a continuance so that the applicant gets an opportunity to have 5 full members, knowing that they need 4. And some applicants, having been offered that, will say, I'm comfortable with 4, and the meeting proceeds. But same thing with the planning board on a special permit. You got to get an extraordinary majority. Again, if your quorum is sufficient to start a meeting, because you've got just the number you need for a permit, but the opportunity to have a full board hear it, my advice has been, and it's usually been customary, that you offer the applicant an opportunity to go to another night where they might get a full contingent to hear their meeting.
Mike, could I ask you a specific question?
You certainly
on that
may.
With a quorum. So, as you know, we have, for many of our boards and committees, we will have associate members. And I think it's been the practice, the understanding that if you had, as an example, you had 5 regular members and 2 associates,
Yep.
and one of those 5 regular members could not attend the meeting, but the 2 associates are there. The procedure would be that the chair can designate one of the associates
That's correct,
to
Mark.
be that sitting 5th member.
That's right.
of the
That's
full committee.
on the regulatory boards. That's why we have those associates, so they can help out. And you're right, it's the call of the chair to appoint whatever associates are there
So I
to fill
think
that spot.
Procedurally, whether it's regulatory or any of the other advisory boards, committees that are meeting, procedurally, if there is a regular member absent and there are associates there, the chair should appoint one of those people as the regular
That's
for that
correct.
meeting
That's
before
correct.
the meeting starts to discuss a matter.
Right.
Okay.
And so that brings me to what is generally asked as a question, well, what if the hearing goes on multiple nights? Which sometimes it can do in a regulatory proceeding. There is the so-called Mullen Rule, which simply is named after a case that came out of the town of Brewster. A person by the name of Mullen brought an action against the town of Brewster because somebody voted on their application that had not been at one of the evidentiary hearings. And so the court came down and, so it's a court-authored, really, rule, which says that in order to take a vote on a regulatory board, you have to have been there at every evidentiary hearing, or you can miss one, and if you miss one, you have to have examined the record, which means review all of the papers that are involved, to watch the meeting, if it was on a video, and then 3, sign an affidavit that goes in the file, which says that you've done that. And if you perform all 3 of those functions, then under the Mullen Rule, you can still sit and still vote. But you can't miss more than one meeting. That only works for one evidentiary meeting. So, but there is that rule out there as well when you get into multiple meetings to keep the quorum together. So if you had 5 people, using your example, of all 5 members were there, 2 associates were there, the 5 members heard it, you get to the next meeting, one of them is absent, the chair could appoint an associate. If the associate had followed through on the Mullen Rule, they could then vote at that second evidentiary hearing. So there's ways to keep it flowing. Unfortunately, I have seen of late in a couple of matters I've been involved in at the zoning board where there were just 4 people there, no associates or whatever, and so they've given people an opportunity to wait to the next meeting for 5. Executive session is when you're allowed to go into a private session, I mean, the general rule is that the business of the public ought to be done in public, and that applies for most all matters, but there are exceptions in which you can go into executive session that normally doesn't apply to most of the regulatory boards unless there is a regulatory board that is involved in active litigation on appeal. They certainly can go into executive session to discuss with counsel the strategy of that session, but they usually don't get into it. The select board, there are a number of matters in which they could go into executive session as part of their regular business, contract negotiations, among other things. And so the select board, I'm not going to go into the details of executive session because I think it is the select board where that most often occurs. However, if you're on a regulatory board and you want to go into executive session, there is a strict policy or protocol, that you need to follow. And you have to state the reason. There has to be a roll call vote. If it is litigation, the chair has to make a finding that holding the meeting in public session might prejudice the litigating position of that board. So if that's going to happen, it's probably important that you let the town manager's office know that you plan on having an executive session with or without counsel, so that can be reviewed to make sure, one, it is a situation where you should be going into executive session, and two, if you need legal assistance at that meeting, they can make it available. Or if it's something that you should not go into executive session for, they could tell you that before you did.
Mike, could I add or have you clarify as well? Executive session does also require capturing minutes, even though they are in a separate set of minutes, and those eventually all become public, except for very, very rare cases where redaction's allowed.
Right. Rare cases where the documents wouldn't be able to become public under the public records provision or some other specific statute. You're correct. But those minutes have to be kept, and at some point, and what is that point? It's the point at which the reason you went into executive session no longer exists. The case has been settled. All those minutes are public, all those discussions that, and executive session minutes have to be acted on in a timely manner once the reason for executive session no longer exists. And you need to keep track of them and approve them as you go along and get them to the town clerk's office. So I'll switch from open meeting law a little bit to generally talk about the conflict of interest statute. When you get sworn in, the town clerk's office gives you a nice package, tells you some things about the conflict of interest statute. There's really a few basic rules. Because you've been appointed to a committee, you are viewed a municipal employee. And you might say, well, I'm not an employee. No one gives me a check. I mean, how can I possibly be an employee? It's a term of art in this case, meaning that you are in a position with the town where you're subject to the conflict of interest statute. And everyone on every committee is subject to the conflict of interest statute. Some employees are special municipal employees, which means there are certain aspects of the conflict of interest statute for which there are the ability in a special municipal employee to request an exemption from certain provisions. Always has to be done ahead of time. It isn't something that simply can be relied on as a matter of course. How do you know whether you're a special municipal employee or a general municipal employee? Should be in the office of the town clerk. I haven't checked of late, but it's the select board that are responsible for classifying positions. They don't classify individuals. It's not Johnny Jones is a special and Mrs. Jones is not. It's members of a particular board are specials or they're generals, and most of that has to do with a lot of the employees of the town, paid employees. And so most of those are all general, but it is the select board that has the authority to determine that. So, the basic rule on the conflict of interest statute is that you can't participate in something in which either you or a member of your immediate family have a direct or indirect financial interest. That's the one that most people run up against if they run up against the conflict of interest statute at all. And it's a pretty simple inquiry when you, particularly on a regulatory board, if you think about it, or even if you're on an advisory board and you're getting into something in which you know either yourself or a member of your immediate family has a direct or indirect financial interest. And in those cases, you need to recuse yourself. And recuse yourself means that you can't participate. Not that you just, at the end of the meeting, say, after being in the discussion and so forth, say, well, I'm going to recuse myself now because I've got a potential conflict of interest. No. You can't participate at all, which means you can't be part of the discussion. You can't have been up there and said, well, gee, I would have seen it this way, and another member says this, and then you recuse yourself at the end. Requires you to do it up front and prohibits not just voting, but prohibits participation, which includes being part of the hearing and part of the discussion. Again, if there's a question about whether you think something rises to the level of an indirect or direct financial interest, get hold of the town manager's office. If they think council needs to be involved, they'll advise you of that. The thing about the conflict of interest statute is you don't necessarily have to go to the town manager's office. The statute's very clear that you can call the state directly. They have an attorney of the day up at the conflict of interest statute office, Attorney General's office, and they will take the question and they will give you advice. And they're very prompt. They're usually there the same day. They'll discuss it with you. And if you decide to do that, that's not public. And it's not required to be public unless, in the course of the meeting or a subsequent meeting, somebody raises the question of whether or not you have a conflict and you tell them that you called the Attorney General's office and you were given the advice. Then it becomes public. And if somebody calls the Attorney General's office, they can give out the information, the question you asked, the information they gave back, then it becomes public. But unless it gets to that point, it's not public. The other option, rather than calling the Attorney General's office, is you can request an opinion of the town council. That request has to go to the executive branch. It's got to go to the town manager's office, and the town manager will then send it to me, or whoever the town council is, and they will answer that, and the answer is confidential, except I'm required to file a copy with the town clerk, so it's not really confidential. So that process becomes a public process, because any response written by town council has got to be filed with the town clerk as well. So if you're really looking to just have a private conversation with the attorney of the day, that number is, I don't know if it's in the handbook, I don't think it is, but you could get it from the town manager's office. You could quickly get it and have that discussion, and that stays private. The other thing that I run into, not as frequently as the last one, but is you can't have more than one job. You can't be working in two different jobs at the town level. Most committee members are not employees from a financial standpoint, so it generally doesn't apply to you. That's generally something that is an analysis of a full-time or part-time employee of the town. Finally, I always mention this, even though it's not in the conflict of interest statute. If you are on a board and you know that you have a particular bias or prejudice with the people involved in it, the applicant, those in opposition or whatever, such that you can't make an objective decision. This is kind of the inquiry that you would have if a judge was voir direing you for a jury and asking you whether you have any prejudice, and that would not allow you to sit on a jury with an open mind. This isn't in the conflict of interest statute, but I advise you of it, and you're the only one who would know whether you have it or not. My advice is just step back on something like that. It may never be a problem, but over the years here, we've had a couple of cases where bias, frankly, of committee members has raised its head on an appeal. And the other members didn't know anything about it, but there were facts that constituted that. So it's so easy to just get up and say, I'm going to take a pass on this one. And you don't have to state what it is, but you're going to recuse yourself for those reasons. The town is asked on occasion, particularly, again, with regulatory boards, when there is an appeal, and there's some of these appeal statutes that say that when the applicant who's been unsuccessful, or an applicant or a neighbor who's been unsuccessful in stopping an application be granted, files an appeal, the requirement is that all board members get served with the complaint. And they naturally raise their hand, hey, what's this? I'm sued. What do I got to do? And I say, don't worry about it. It's, no, I am worried about it because I'm named individually. You know? Do I have to call my own insurance? Do I have to? The answer is that the town insures all of you for your work on your committee, provided that it's in the normal course of business of a committee member, and it's not something that's outside the committee role. But if you're just doing your job and they don't like your decision and you get sued individually or whatever, town has your back. We have insurance, we have municipal liability coverage, and all of you are entitled to that if you find yourself in one of those situations. Do I have time to talk just a little bit about email?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So what a wonderful thing email is. I mean, we all use it every day. We probably figure out how we couldn't get through a day without using emails, communication to get our jobs done, to contact each other, whether it be social, professional, business, or otherwise. But in the context of being a committee member, email is a public record. So anything you do as a committee member, one is required that you're supposed to send a copy of that email to the town's email system. We have what's the actual name of it that you're going to send a copy to?
Mail.
Commail. You have to send a copy to Commail. That's a requirement. Why? Because it's a public record, and if the town is served with a FOIA request, we go to Commail first and to look for what the records are having to do with that particular committee, or if they request, the FOIA request names you specifically, we review what is in Commail. So the only way we can keep track of that is if you follow through and do what you're supposed to do, which is if it's an official email dealing with a committee, got to send a copy to Commail. The other thing about email is that it raises havoc with the open meeting law. And it does so because the open meeting law prohibits deliberation, very broad word under the open meeting law, of a quorum of members of a committee from occurring unless it's a posted meeting. So what happens is you often get these kind of tree emails where somebody, innocently enough sometimes, sends an email to one of the other committee members. Geez, I was thinking about what we were just reviewing at the meeting, and you know, I find this and this, and I think about this, and what do you think? That might come back, might get to a third person, and all of a sudden, we're at a quorum. We've got a problem, because that would be deliberation under the open meeting law and prohibited. So you got to be very careful, really, when you're using your email account as a committee member. It should be limited to administrative matters. Hey, have you seen the agenda? What's on it? Here's an issue that maybe, and you can send that to the chair, that I'd suggest might become an agenda item, but that should only go to the chair. You know, when are we meeting? Factual things. But once you get into policy, don't put it in email. Save it for the committee meeting and put it out there on the public record.
I can add just one real example, and it's come up year after year, particularly around the holidays, because you will get the request for the committee's annual report. And normally everyone's scrambling to look at what we did last year, update, and it raises the potential, because of the short time frame, that a committee chair will send that draft report to everybody to comment on. That is an example of deliberation, because someone will say, I think we should say it this way. No, I think the request should go, as Mike said, if the chair sends the draft, comment only back to the chair with your edits. Let the chair work out the track changes stuff.
Exactly. That's an excellent example. Entirely innocent one. I mean, you might say, well, why would they care about something like that? They don't, but technically it becomes a deliberation. And as Kevin says, once you've gone down that slippery slope, it's very hard to come back, because then it gets into other things. So I'll stop there. If there's questions, happy to take them on any of those issues or other issues. Mark?
Questions?
I have a question.
Lisa?
What would it take to get us all town email addresses, and we wondered if we use them?
Well, we have looked at that a little bit, because there was an issue not too long ago where we felt that maybe it would be good. I think the town clerk's office reached out to some other communities to ask if they're providing emails to all committee members, and do you remember, Jen, what Kelly found?
There wasn't very many.
Yeah, there weren't many, maybe some of the major committees, like the regulatory boards. But there is a cost to each email, so that's where it kind of comes into play as to what direction we're gonna go with that.
Would it be fair to say that's under advisement in the manager's office?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, having been someone who has needed to get information from towns, it is very, it's very much appreciated when there's a standard way of getting it, and you can trust the information you're getting back.
Right.
My other question is, can you, Attorney Ford, talk about disclosures and when they're appropriate? And do they take the place of recusing, or how do we see disclosures?
Sure, good question. So there are some provisions in the Conflict of Interest statute which specifically provide that if a reasonable person had knowledge of your situation as a committee member, they might think that you might be able to be unduly influenced by somebody involved in either an applicant or those in favor or those against or whatever. And the Conflict of Interest statute allows, in certain of those situations, for you to disclose that ahead of time. There is a disclosure form. Sometimes the disclosure has to be approved by the select board if they're the appointing agency. And if all of that happens and a copy of it gets filed with the town clerk, and then gets announced at the committee meeting, you're good to go. And so what about the next time? If the disclosure is right on point with the prior one, you can simply make a comment at the next meeting that I have filed a disclosure, and you don't have to go through that entire process again. But the Conflict of Interest office in the Attorney General's office has generated a whole series of forms on some of these things, and they do have a specific disclosure form. It's fairly easy to use, so.
Yes.
Question about quorum, and very real for tomorrow. Scott Flood, Affordable Housing Committee. We are a committee of 7, we are down to 4. We have a meeting tomorrow, it's a joint meeting with the trust. It is quite likely that I'm not gonna have a quorum, I'm not gonna have 4, I'm gonna have 3. Can we still have a meeting?
No. If it's a joint meeting,
It's a joint meeting.
the other committee could have a meeting if they have an agenda. It just would not be a joint meeting.
Okay.
So it doesn't cancel both, but your part of that that makes it a joint meeting could not go forward.
Other questions on any of the things that we've touched on this evening?
There were cookies.
There are cookies. That's not a question. That's a disclosure. Yes, Constance.
Hi. I wondered if, Michael, you might be able to just discuss the Rogers Rule of Order. I think that kind of is a nice overview for all committee members, especially new committee members.
Sure. The charter requires that committees organize annually and elect officers, and also requires that you adopt some generally accepted rules of procedure. And in Orleans, and I think we might even mention it in the book, we recommend Robert's Rules of Order. They're fairly straightforward, although they were not written with municipal committees in mind. Robert's Rules of Orders really has its genesis back in the private clubs and or private organizations, and it was a way to give them some order. But I think in terms of a handbook, a simple handbook for committees, that is the one we would recommend. They're available in paperback. I mean, at some point, if they're giving committees consternation or there's a suggestion that we go in another direction on that, I'm sure if you mention it to the manager's office, that might be a good subject of a meeting or something, and we have a discussion on it. I will tell you, just as an aside, one of the other things that I do in addition to some town council work and other legal work is I'm a town moderator. And when I ran for moderator too many years ago, you don't want to know, the handbook of parliamentary procedure in the town at that time was called Cushing's Manual of Parliamentary Procedure. I went to the town hall. They didn't have a copy. This is the town that I'm running in, grew up in, and I found a copy in the Boston Public Library, and I brought it with me at the first town meeting. And when I called somebody out of order as a result of Section 689 of Cushing's Manual of Parliamentary Procedure, and I read it, I was quite young at the time, everybody kind of looked at me like, what the, you know? And so then I reminded them that our handbook in our bylaw was Cushing's. Fast forward, I sponsored an article a couple of years later to have the town adopt its own rules of procedure at town meeting. We did that. We have our own rules of procedure, just like you do in Orleans. Why? Because so many of these handbooks are not, do not have the town meeting legislative process in mind when they were created. And so you're seeing more and more of each town having its own rules of procedure. I wouldn't be surprised at some point whether some towns are saying, you know what, Robert's Rules is okay for some things, but maybe we ought to put together, you know, Orleans Rules of Procedure for committees. It might be easier, it might be more simple, because there's a lot in Roberts that just doesn't have any application to the deliberation should make at local meetings. Just a thought.
Mark, one thing I was thinking about, and Mike Ford mentioned a number of times public records, you know, the minutes and things like that. And I thought for Jen, she might want to give you an example, whether or not become a requested party for documents. A few of us have, we know what it's like, but just maybe Jen might want to walk us through, how does a public records request come in? How does it get processed?
There's a lot.
This-
We have so many. So anybody can request any records. It can be done online using our Just FOIA portal. They can get a paper and fill out a paper, and we put that into the online portal, and then we provide the documents. We have 10 days to provide documents or a response. If it's going to be a fee, we need to get a 50% deposit of the fee, generally speaking, which is $25 an hour if it's something very lengthy. We've had requests small, like how many dog licenses. We've had very large, very cumbersome requests. It takes a lot. We really, really appreciate everything that you guys do so that we have the documents up front for some of them that we can just provide. We can link to the website, we can upload them. But it's a lot. Kelly handles most of it and she takes lots of classes on it. I've just started, so there's tons of information she has to provide, but it's a very big process.
Just as a follow-up on that, so the public record statute now requires each town to designate the person in the town who will be in charge of receiving and responding to a public records request. And in Orleans, Kelly is our designated person as the town clerk, which is why everything goes through her if you've been involved in a public records request.
Except for police.
Oh, that's right, for police, yeah.
Police have their own.
Yes, Lee?
I'd like to go back to quorum, and how do you calculate a quorum? So say you have 5 people, what's the calculation? Is it half 50?
So if you have 5 people and you're not in one of these situations where you need an extraordinary majority, a quorum is a majority of the total members of the committee, so it's 3 in that case. So you need 3 to be present to do business,
And that includes the chair?
and that includes the chair.
Thank you.
No, if a chair's not there, you can still have a meeting. Somebody can be appointed as temporary chair for that night. So the absence of a chair doesn't necessarily take you out of having a quorum.
It's the bodies.
Other questions or comments from anyone?
Do you have a suggestion for public comment? Should it be at the beginning of the meeting, at the end of the meeting? Can it be can you close it and reopen it? Is
So-
it up to the chair?
Yeah, the chair, at least the way we operate at the select board level, is the chair has the discretion to allow people to comment. So normally, we have held public comment at the beginning of the meeting. The notion of public comment, I think, at least our interpretation of it has been, citizens can come and speak to something that's not an agenda item. They can request that it become a future agenda item. They can just want to make a comment about something they saw around town, liked, disliked, or whatever it might be. Because it's not an agenda item, the select board does not respond to it or deliberate on it at all. What I think we have done, I know as chairman in the past and now, if we know that there are people in the audience that want to make comment on something that is an agenda item for later in the meeting, I can give them the opportunity as chair to make public comment beforehand. I can also, as chair, I have the discretion to allow them to enter into the discussion that's going on amongst the select board when we're hearing that particular agenda item. I'm not required to, but, you know, I think oftentimes we will. I ask people not to do both. You know, if you're gonna take up time at the beginning of the meeting, then let somebody else during the meeting do that. So the chair has a lot of discretion in how they want to handle that. We do have a policy that says public comment should be limited to, I think it's 3 minutes per person, and should not last more than 30 minutes in the meeting. And that's just, as I said, because you're dealing with things that are not part of the agenda, and you need to get to your agenda. And the chairperson has the discretion to allow people to speak, or, you know, cut it off. It's like you've had your 3 minutes, or you're repeating something already said, or whatever. So it's a lot of the discretion of the chair.
And if I can add too, Mark, whichever way you go, it does need to be an agenda item. And I know there were a few meetings last year where the select board, for whatever reason, we had to meet very early in the day, whether it was executive session and coming out with staff. So I think Michael was the chair at the time. He had heard, and we all did, some pushback to say, I could never get out of work to even come and give you public comment. So you would have seen in those periods, we had public comment at the beginning and right before we adjourned. So kind of, you know, what fits the needs, but it must be a posted item.
That's Phil.
I just want to share the experience of Shellfish Waterways. We used to have public comment near the end of the meeting. We don't have public comment all that often. But a few times we had people that sat there through the whole meeting, usually goes 2 hours, and then they just wanted to make an announcement. So we moved it to the beginning. And the other thing that I try to be aware of, it's not just people sitting in the audience. There could be people on Zoom, so I usually ask and make sure they know that it's public comment time.
Yeah.
We also, most of the time, allow some discussion by members of the public during our discussions, but I always ask for committee members to make their comments first. Although lots of times it's a back and forth, but to make sure they get it first. And I think people appreciate that, especially if they don't want to be there the whole meeting, they just want to tell you something and go. Thanks.
And I think, you know, the chairs of those boards and committees certainly want to allow discussion and public participation, but also there's a recognition that you're there for a purpose and you have an agenda and you need to deal with that, and so you can't let, you know, public comment dominate your whole time, your whole meeting time and stuff. And so it's, you know, the onus is on the chair to do what they think is appropriate at the time, and I think we've had pretty good luck with that. I know other towns, I've witnessed meetings where they just let public comment go, and they'll have 3 hours of people, one after another, coming up and complaining, and you're sitting there with an agenda that's, you know, 2 pages long, and it's like, you've been there 3 hours and nothing's happened. So there needs to be some reality injected into that whole process. And I think, as I said, the chairs, I think, in Orleans have really done a pretty good job of handling that.
Another minor flexibility of running your meetings, particularly those that might have 6 or 7 or maybe even more agenda items, and we'll nudge each other sometimes if on our agenda we may have item 8 is one person's license and they've been sitting in the back of the room for, you know, an hour and a half. We'll usually say, can we take this one out of order? You actually do need to vote that. If your agenda changes the order, we vote to take item 8 out of order and then proceed back to item 4, whatever it is.
The chair could probably do that by discretion. I like you actually take a vote, which is
We'll ask for
kinda-
the consensus to
kinda-
do that.
Yeah, kind of good, so.
Okay. Other questions or comments from people? Okay, well, we do have some snacks over here, so I think at that, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all very much for being.